Hormones. We briefly talked about hormones in the last unit, and we've kind of talked about them all along, especially with plants. The first part is a basic overview. Remember that hormones are chemical signals, okay? They're chemical signals. We've talked about signaling and responses before, and hormones go everywhere, but they only work on target cells. We'll come back to that. So one example, which we'll come back to at the end, is insect metamorphosis, is hormone related. So we basically have two ways to internally communicate animals, the nervous system and the endocrine system, and they work together. Nervous system uses basically electrical signals. We'll come back to this using neurons. The endocrine system secretes hormones. Slower, but act longer for response. So generally, these function together, okay? There are specialized nerve cells that secrete what we call neurohormones, okay? And neurohormones can work on different things to serve as long-distance regulators. We're talking feet, right? 6 feet down your body instead of from one cell to another. There are basically three types of hormonal control pathways. There's the simple endocrine, neurohormone, and neuroendocrine. And all of these have something called a feedback loop. And we're going to talk about negative feedback in response to one particular hormone today. So here's a simple endocrine pathway. Your endocrine cell in your pancreas recognizes you have low blood sugar, secretes a hormone called glucagon into the bloodstream, gets to your liver, makes a response to release glucose. That's a simple endocrine pathway. We're going to talk about that one in more detail later. Here's a neurohormone pathway where you have a stimulus. Baby is sucking on a breast. Sensory neuron sends a message to the hypothalamus in your brain, sends a signal or to the pituitary, secretes a hormone. Because of that, secretes a hormone into the brain called into the body called oxytocin. Oxytocin stimulates milk released in the breast. We have a neuroendocrine pathway. Okay, same concept of milk production. Sensory neurons, okay, sometimes just seeing a baby or having another hormone release, maybe a rise in progesterone from the ovary. Hypothalamus has a neurosecretory cell that secretes prolactin-releasing hormone. Prolactin-releasing hormone stimulates an endocrine cell to release prolactin. Prolactin then secretes into the bloodstream for the mammary glands to produce milk. Okay, that's more complicated where you actually get a two-hormone response to a signal. So, you don't have to know these three classes of hormone molecules. Just briefly, they're proteins derived from amino acids and steroid hormones. Again, to review this, signaling involves three events. You have to be able to receive the signal. You have to have a receptor. You have to be able to transduce the signal in a cell. So in other words, take it from one place and bring it to another. And then you have to have the response. This is stuff we talked about back in chapter 11 when we did it. So here's an example. Hormone molecules secreted into the blood. There's a signal receptor on a target cell. There's what's called a transduction pathway to either make the DNA change or to create a response in the cytoplasm. Okay, and same concept here, except that sometimes hormone molecules go directly into cells, okay, where the receptor is actually in the nucleus. So this slide just shows that you can get different responses. The same hormone can make different cells do different things. Epinephrine can make your intestinal blood vessels constrict, make your skeletal muscle blood vessels dilate, and make your liver cells produce glucose. We're going to come back to that one a little bit later. There are chemical signals called local regulators. If you see the word paracrine, not endocrine, we're talking about cell-to-cell communication nearby. Okay, we'll talk about neurotransmitters with the nervous system. Some cells can make other cells grow. Cytokines we talked about with mitosis. Nitric oxide and prostaglandins are two others. So the major organs of the endocrine system are the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. They're in control. This is often called the master gland. Okay, and then there's some tables in your book that talk about all the stuff that the pituitary gland does, and then what various glands throughout the body do. Here are where the various hormone glands are. Okay, with the pituitary and the hypothalamus in your brain, thyroid glands in your neck. Okay, in a male, the testes, in a female, the ovaries. Not shown, but it would be in here. Okay, adrenal glands, pancreas, all endocrine glands. Okay, and so again, the idea is that the nerve cell comes to the brain. Hypothalamus says, "Oh, a baby is pushing on the wall of the uterus." Sends a signal to the pituitary, which sends a hormone into the bloodstream. Let's say the hormone's oxytocin, to make the uterus contract. And now this just shows a bunch of different hormones and what they do. Again, not a big deal to really know all these in detail. So non-pituitary hormones is a couple we want to talk about. Okay, thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones are somehow in charge of cellular respiration and the release of energy, and we're not exactly sure how, but we do know that the pituitary releases a hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone, which stimulates the thyroid to produce thyroid hormones. The more of this hormone you have is an inhibitor. So if you have more T3, it inhibits the anterior pituitary to stop producing hormone. That's called negative feedback. Negative feedback. More of this tells that to stop. Less of this, go ahead and produce it. Here's an example of hormonal regulation of calcium. Okay, let's start here. Normal blood calcium level is about 10 milligrams per 100 mils. As blood calcium rises, thyroid gland releases a hormone called calcitonin. Calcitonin tells your kidneys, all right, quit saving calcium, release it in, and stimulates the deposition of calcium in your bones. When the calcium is taken out of your blood and put on your bones, the blood calcium level goes back down. Let's say you're running low on blood calcium. The parathyroid gland, located by the thyroid, releases parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone has the opposite effect. Okay, the opposite effect from calcitonin. They work on a negative feedback system. Here's one that's probably more famous, because of a disease called diabetes, is blood glucose control. Your blood glucose level, this rises and falls a lot more than your calcium level anyway. Let's say you just ate and your blood glucose level is going up. Pancreas releases insulin into the blood. Insulin is like a key that unlocks body cells to take up more glucose. The other thing insulin does is tells the liver cells to take up all those glucose particles and store them as glycogen, chains of glucose molecules, remember from chapter 4 or 5. So once it does that, now the level of sugar in your blood goes back down. We call that, quote, blood sugar. Okay, so it's down. It's back to where it should be. But let's say you haven't eaten for a while during the day, or you're on a diet or something like that. Your beta cells of your the alpha cells in your pancreas will produce something called glucagon. Glucagon's target is the liver to break down glycogen and release glucose into the food. Into the blood. So glucagon has the opposite effect of insulin on the liver. Now it takes all that stored glycogen, breaks it up, and sends it into the bloodstream. So a quick overview then. Insulin reduces blood glucose by promoting cells to take it in, slowing glycogen breakdown, or actually stimulating storage of glycogen, and promoting fat storage. Takes some of the excess energy and build some fat molecules out of it. Glucagon does the opposite. Stimulates the conversion of glycogen to glucose and stimulates the breakdown of fat and protein into glucose for cellular respiration. So then briefly about diabetes. Diabetes is caused by a deficiency of insulin or a decreased response to insulin. So insulin's basically been overproduced, is the theory. That's tested by measuring blood glucose. And what they usually do, a simple test, is a urine test. Because if your blood glucose is high, you are going to excrete more sugar than you need in your urine. So we say if somebody has high blood sugar, that means that their insulin is not working correctly. For either they're not producing it or it's a decreased response. There's type 1 diabetes where the beta cells in the pancreas don't work anymore. We have no idea why yet. There's type 2 diabetes where, again, as I said before, it's either a little bit of less insulin is being produced or, more often, less response of the target cells. They're not taking sugar out of the blood like they used to. So then to come back, we haven't done much research on this, being humans, but there are diverse hormones in invertebrates. In insects, development is driven by 3 hormones. Brain hormone stimulates the release of something called ecdysone. Ecdysone is the one that promotes molting. Okay, molting. So an insect can, some insects can shed their skin. Some invertebrates shed their skin, and we've figured that pathway out, a hormone called ecdysone, for what it's worth. So that's our discussion of the endocrine system.